This week's episode is brought to you by Sukkot Giving, TC Jewfolk's fall event on Sunday, November 3rd from 5 to 7 p.m. at Bethel Synagogue. This event is a beautiful and delicious celebration of the American Jewish experience, and nothing says American Jewish experience more to us than the all too familiar juggling we do in the moments between the high holidays and Thanksgiving. The beauty and crossover of fall, the harvest, and the focus on gratitude isn't lost on us. This is going to be a beautiful evening with a gorgeous catered, kosher, vegetarian, and dairy fall meal, live music with The Long Honeymoon, a grounding moment with Rabbi Jill Avrin from YourJewish, small gifts for any children present from PJ Library, and a meaningful moment and gift for all in attendance with local artist Robin Awend. It is going to be a delight. Tickets are on sale now, so to learn more and get your tickets, go to bit.ly/SukkotGiving. That's bit.ly/SukkotGiving to get your tickets today. Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I talked to Rabbi Jill Avrin, the founder of YourJewish. We talk about her transition from pulpit rabbi to nonprofit founding director, Green Bay Packers football, and YourJewish being part of TC Jewfolk's Sukkot Giving on November 3rd on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Rabbi Jill Avrin, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
So it feels a little weird to have you on the podcast, in part because in the course of this job, I've gotten to know you and we've talked dozens of times over the years I've done this job. But in the last 12 or so months, there's been a bit of a career transition for you, which I think now that you have had about a year or so of YourJewish being up and running, feels like a great time to talk about it. So for starters, tell us what YourJewish is.
Thanks so much for starting with this and giving me an opportunity to talk a little bit about what I'm doing. YourJewish was really born from the way that I started my rabbinic journey. I grew up in an unaffiliated home. And for me, when I was a kid, Judaism really was only holidays, family, that's pretty much it. And my path to the rabbinate started in BBYO when that was my first introduction to the formal Jewish community. And immediately I felt on the margins, like I was an outsider. People would ask me, like, what synagogue do you belong to? And I wouldn't have an answer for that. And at the time, the way I handled that was by leaning in and putting myself in the center of the Jewish community. So I did all the things, camp, youth group, like I did it all. I chose to become immersed and ended up in the in crowd by choice.
Okay.
But always sort of held on to the real pain that I experienced at the beginning of feeling like I was on the outside or I wasn't fully accepted because my family didn't belong to a synagogue. Okay. And that was always sort of in the back of my mind throughout my rabbinic journey. So, even in my 10 years at Bet Shalom, I was always thinking, like, who's not here? Right. Who are the people who, like, okay, this is amazing that we have, 250 kids and like, look at this program, 80 people showed up. But what about the thousands of people who didn't come? What about the people who were like me growing up, who had, an interfaith home, unaffiliated? Like, where are those people? And eventually I decided, like, the time is, if not now, when?
Right.
And I was ready to take that leap professionally in my career and decided that, this is really a gap in the Twin Cities where there are a lot of people who are in unaffiliated homes who care about their Jewish identity but don't yet haven't yet found the right way to express it. And so YourJewish, it seeks to be an answer to that problem, to try to find ways to provide for people who are currently unengaged or underengaged, more independent options outside of institutional buildings and history and trauma that some people have, and to try something new, creative public space Judaism, and independent ritual.
One of the things that I found really interesting is that there's a perception, I think, at least it's a perception I had, and it turns out it was not at all correct. But for a while in this job, this perception of the Twin Cities being this highly affiliated community. And then the most recent, and again, at this point it's 5 years old, but the most recent population study comes out, and it turns out we're not at all that.
Right.
In fact, there are these vast majority of people that you speak of who are on the margins, who are outside of the mainstream, some by choice, because they just don't want necessarily anything to do with the Jewish community for whatever their reasons may be, or because they haven't found the right option that's for them, so they've just stayed away in their own corner of the Twin Cities.
Right.
Is that the kind of thing that you encountered in the sort of ramp up to YourJewish?
Yeah, absolutely. When that study came out, I'm a huge data nerd, and I read the whole thing cover to cover. And as I was reading it, it was like, I was like, how are we not like jumping out of our seats, like about the data that was in this report? I think initially there were people who saw that report and said, oh, wow, look at how much the Jewish community has grown in the last 20 years. And then everybody was well, wait a minute, actually, maybe we just didn't have the right data to begin with. And it's it's not necessarily there are all these new Jews in the Twin Cities. There are, but we haven't necessarily known how to capture all of the folks who are unaffiliated, back in 2000, the early 2000s, the last time there was a population study. And so, I think that many people, the fact that there are potentially 80,000 people living in Jewish households in the Twin Cities is mind-blowing.
Right.
And just, the number of people who are out there who don't affiliate, we need to do something about it.
It's funny the way you sort of phrase that, of people look at, there's all these new Jews, and there isn't though. But I think some of the struggle I had with sort of understanding the numbers comes from the differences in methodology. And let's say it's, again, very data nerdy, but in terms of how people were, how they were found, where they lived. The last time it was Hennepin, Ramsey, and Dakota counties. Right. Now you're looking at the full 7-county metro. So those people were probably always there.
Right.
But how do you reach them is
that's
always
question.
Been sort of the, listen, that's the $64,000 question right there.
We still don't have all the answers to that.
Right. But. So starting up YourJewish, how do you look at that question and try to figure out how do you find and how do you bring them into something Jewishly? Yeah,
like you said, that's the $1 million question. If everyone had the answer to this, then we wouldn't.
That's very true.
We would be in a different place as a community. But I also think that we haven't, as a formal Jewish community, I don't think we have quite put in the effort that we could have, and we haven't quite explored our creativity to the best extent that we could. And I'll give one example. I don't think there is one answer, first of all. But one answer, I think, is, word of mouth and networking and sort of that grassroots organizing, who do you know? And, that's one of the ways that I have been finding people is just, you should talk to my cousin, or, and truly, that has been one of the highest, means of getting new folks. But I'm going to give one other example of something I actually did yesterday that I'm in the process of writing about, is I had a booth at a festival
I saw the pictures of the setup, so talk about it.
It was a vegan festival in St. Paul. I don't know exactly how many people were there. They say 5,000. But either way, I set up a booth in a festival, sold challah and arugula, and taught challah braiding, and had a sort of like ask the rabbi poster. And it really was like the classic version of outreach, like being in the public domain and advertising Judaism.
Yes.
And sort of like seeing what happens.
It's so incredibly analog in a digital world.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, it seems so. Yeah, I don't know how to characterize it, but I'm telling you that like over the course of like the 6 hours of the festival, I haven't counted. I don't have like all of my data, but at least 15 people who came and introduced themselves to me who are exactly this target demographic. People who are living in Jewish households, who don't belong to synagogues, who, my dad was Jewish, but I didn't, sort of people who grew up like me, like, I celebrate Hanukkah and Passover Jews. Sure. Or people, I met an Israeli, I met a Russian Jew, all these people who, people who are new to the Twin Cities. And, it's sort of like now granted, this isn't thousands of people. Like I just said, it was maybe 15, but those are people who they're not on like the Jewfolk listserv. They're not on the Federation listserv. Like they are the people who no other Jewish institution has yet been able to find them. And again, it's not en masse, but again, like right now, there really aren't, at least that I'm aware of, there are not a lot of efforts from other Jewish institutions, synagogues, organizations to sort of plant themselves in the public sphere and sort of like try to literally meet people where they are. Chabad is doing a bit of that work.
Yeah.
But it's a different expression of Judaism.
For sure.
So,
I mean, was the saying like the journey of 100 miles starts with a single step?
Yes, exactly.
Something.
Right.
I'm butchering it badly, but yes, that's it. It is the getting out, and it's the as close to retail. Right. I guess retail. I was going to say retail politics, but retail Judaism as there is the meeting people out in the world and saying, I am a rabbi. Let's talk.
Setting up shop like in the public domain.
Yeah.
And sort of
literally in the public square.
Exactly.
So you grew up in Milwaukee?
I grew up in the northern suburbs of Milwaukee.
Okay. So
correct.
You not growing up sort of immersed in the Jewish community until you self-selected in, basically. That's quite a journey from unaffiliated, unconnected to deciding to go to rabbinic school.
Right.
What was the path that led you there?
Well, I was one of these people who, I often describe some of my teenage years, like my form of teenage rebellion was like leaning into religion. So early on,
we had very different.
I have that rebellion spirit, but it is maybe not in the typical fashion.
Fair enough.
And so in many ways, like early on, like when I was a freshman in high school, like the seed was already planted, and I, thought like that. I'm going to be a Jewish professional. Maybe I'll be a rabbi. Maybe I'll be a camp director. But like I just was all in from like month one.
Okay.
And like I said, like put myself on that journey and sort of forced myself into the in crowd.
Not growing up with that. Again, I don't know what would be considered classically Jewish anymore. I think of it through my own lens of growing up in Judaism, but not growing up sort of in that kind of Jewish way. What was sort of your examples of how to go from A to B? Like, what did you lean into?
Yeah, I think that because for me, the formative years were my teen years, I I really relied on sort of the organizational, like the BBYO, the camp network, sort of like my friend peer network, and took advantage of those relationships. But I think, the key takeaway for me over and over again was like how deeply I learned, like it's like who you know, not what you know. Like I could teach myself Hebrew, but it didn't really matter if I didn't know anybody else who was Jewish. And so it's like like the answer was like networking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is a way more, it's more intentional,
right?
But also like, I think it helps plant the roots
right
a little bit stronger. Like my own background, I was a day school kid growing up in Detroit. And I think by the time I certainly bar mitzvah, but even maybe by the time I was graduated 8th grade and moved on to public school, I was kind of checked out for a little while.
Right. It's like burnout.
Because it's just so much of it, and it's so in your face all the time. Mom, if you're listening, sorry. But it's
you came back.
I'm back. Yeah. I'm back. I'm here. It's an interest. I think it's just an interesting path. A great example of there are multiple paths to get to a end goal.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people who convert to Judaism, I've heard, have had sort of like similar experiences that I have, where it's like people say, "Oh, you grew up in Milwaukee, like, do you know this rabbi?" Or like, "Oh, what camp did you go to?" So I think that there are some, for people who didn't go to day school or didn't go to camp, I think that there's a different path. But now, like, I think what we're starting to see all these years later is when you look at the data, it's like I used to think of myself as being in the minority, but actually from like a data perspective, I was the majority. And I think that's something that I hope that, that Jewish professionals will start to sort of like flip, in their understanding as well, that, it's actually the majority experience not to be one of those kids.
Right. And I think most people in sort of I consider Jewfolk and what I do is sort of in the non-traditional Jewish professional space. But I think so many people in the very, mainstream Jewish professional space look at it through the lens of they look at their experience as the mainstream Jewish experience.
Right. That's right.
And that's probably not the case.
Yeah, it's not. And I think that that's something that like Jewfolk understands as well, like that we need to find other ways to reach people, other than just the day school, the camp, the synagogue.
Right. And that's again, it sort of goes back to the challenge of what you're trying to start up with YourJewish is how where do you go to meet the people? How do you, and it's also can be very, it's a difficult time to publicly put yourself out there as Jewish in the public space.
Yeah,
it can be scary to be publicly Jewish right now.
Yeah, it can be. And I even had a little bit of that yesterday. Like I didn't have it for me, it actually was only a positive experience.
Right.
But certainly it crossed my mind, like that I'm putting up this huge banner that says "You're Jewish."
Right.
In a space that, the demographics of people who attend a vegan festival tend to be, more on the progressive lens. And so, it definitely made me a little bit nervous to be that sort of outwardly Jewish, but I really believe in it, and I didn't have any issue. The only time that people that Israel even came up were from other Jews who were like, "Are you okay? Has anyone harassed you?" And I'm like, "No, they haven't."
Nice to have people looking out for you.
Yeah, exactly.
I suppose. What's the transition been like? I think people, when people think of rabbis, they think of being on the pulpit, being in a synagogue, and there's obviously plenty of there's education, there's camp, there's like all the other kinds of rabbis that you mentioned.
Right.
What's the transition been like for you to go from pulpit rabbi? You were at Bet Shalom for 10 years?
10 years, yeah.
To go from that to this brand new startup is obviously an incredibly intense
Yeah.
kind of thing. What's that been like?
It's been, there are so many like mixed emotions and ways of describing the transition. So there's no like one path. On the one hand, from a personal dimension, my work-life balance has like dramatically improved. And we were just chatting about that a little bit before we started. But, to be able to be in control of my schedule with 3 kids is pretty transformational. And, the demands on pulpit rabbis are immense in terms of scheduling. And not to say I'm not still putting in long hours and working nights and weekends, because I am, but I'm in control of my schedule, and I'm not working every Friday night, Saturday morning, Sunday morning, Wednesday night. And so from a balance, just a life balance perspective, It's been just like transformational. And so I couldn't be happier. And professionally too, like I feel like I'm more like honed in on, on the work that I'm doing, as opposed to the life of a pulpit rabbi is just like you're literally doing everything. And now I have a more, I'm energized by this like particular mission that I'm on. And so I feel, like after 10 years, like I had some burnout, and now I feel like I have that spark back of like trying to do something unique and different and creative. I definitely have had a share of people who have said like, oh, how does it feel not to be a rabbi anymore? And I'm like, wait a minute.
Whoa. Time out.
So there's definitely that, perception, I think, from the broader community of like, what a rabbi is and what they do. Right. So, because I obviously feel I am doing rabbinic work.
Absolutely. Right. And that's the thing. I think people, again, it goes back to people's framings, right? And their framing of the rabbi is, you'll lead minyan twice a week. You have Shabbat services Friday night, Saturday morning, and officiate weddings and funerals.
Right.
That's it.
And even though I know that pulpit rabbis do more than that. A lot of people don't. Like, what do you do Monday to Thursday? And it's like, So I think that hopefully over time that will change.
Yes. No. Yeah. Absolutely. So not being at a synagogue anymore, although you're still a rabbi, you don't have the typical, fall, late summer, early fall stress that comes with preparing for the high holidays, writing sermons, leading services, all that.
Right.
What's that? I mean, this is your second high holiday cycle in that mode. What's it been like to not have to sweat the same way you used to?
Yeah. It's mixed because, it's nice I still have stress, but it's different stress because I'm still, it's still sort of like the fall is when you launch programs.
Sure.
So I have like that start of the year stress, but it's not that like specific, mostly sermon writing is, like the big weight, I think, that I used to feel, as a pulpit rabbi. And, it's mixed because on the one hand, it's, again, like nice to have a little more balance in my life and to be focusing on different things. On the other hand, there are definitely a lot of things that I miss about being in a congregation. Sure. And I loved giving sermons. It's something I really enjoyed doing. And so there's definitely a bit of loss there that I don't have, sort of this like default crowd of like hundreds of folks who are in attendance who I get to, speak to.
Sure.
And so that definitely is a bit of a loss. That being said, I have replaced that with other types of work and trying to stay, there are other ways to celebrate the holidays other than attending a worship service. And so decided that I would lean into trying to provide those opportunities for folks who are looking for something different. And that was meaningful as well.
So speaking of something different, you are going to be involved in Jewfolk's first fall fundraiser event we are doing called Sukkot Giving. It is the fall-themed harvest-type communal event that our executive director, Libby Parker, has dreamed about doing in some version for a long time. It is coming up November 3rd at Bethel Synagogue, and you are going to be a big part of that. What is your plan for those of us in attendance that evening?
I am so excited about this event. I think it's so creative, and that's why I was super honored to be asked to participate. So thank you. I just think it's a really beautiful way to sort of combine, different aspects of our identities. So sort of being framed of like, where's the overlap between our Jewish and American identities, and how can we like lift that up and celebrate like the Venn diagram of like Sukkot and Thanksgiving, and like where do they overlap, and where can we sort of like lift up those shared values and traditions. And I think, so that on like as a concept, I think it's brilliant.
Yes.
And on a more sort of concrete level, I think that I personally, fall's my favorite season.
Okay.
For lots of different reasons. The weather, football, there's a lot of reason, the start of the new year. And I think that this event is going to be a beautiful way to sort of like celebrate fall, both through Jewish tradition, but then also like the American traditions. But I think leaning into the harvest, the idea of like offering gratitude and gathering together to celebrate the harvest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it has been, so as we're recording this, it's technically fall has been for 2 days.
Yeah.
You're already it's already sweater weather for you.
It's sweater weather as of 2 days ago.
As of 2 days ago.
Yeah.
So you do love the fall.
I
You
do.
are all in.
I'm all in for the
on
fall.
fall weather and the
Yes.
Packers and.
That's right. Go Pack, go.
No.
You can edit that out.
No, I'm not going to edit it out. I'm just saying, as a Lions fan, I'm not standing for that at all.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens this year.
Yeah, listen, it'll be great. Lions,
More
Vikings,
competitive.
Packers. It'll be.
Yeah.
Yes, more competitive football is
It's always a good
enjoyable.
thing. Yeah.
We'll take that. So I did get a kick, speaking of the Packers. You posted on Facebook recently. You are now under 10,000
That's right.
in line for tickets on the wait list.
Correct.
A wait list for you that started, I'm going to do math on the fly here, 27 years ago?
It was, wow,
1997?
you're doing the math that I haven't actually done. So it was
1997.
1997.
Yeah, so about 27 years ago.
So, yeah, so I was in middle school. And
Wait, you got yourself on a season ticket wait list in middle school?
Correct.
That's amazing.
It was, so
boy, Packer fans are hardcore.
I went on
That's
the wait
awesome.
list the day after the Packers won the Super Bowl that year. So I was so excited about, that was before that.
That's some formative years
Yeah,
there.
you're in middle school, the Packers win the Super Bowl.
Sure.
And I wanted to get myself on that list and signed up myself, got a letter in the mail, to my parents' house.
Oh my God.
And I'm now, at that time, I was over 30,000 on the list in 1997. I'm now 27 years. Is that what we said? 27?
Yeah. It'll be 20. It'll be 28 years January.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
28 years January.
years later, I'm under 10,000. And from what I hear, I don't know the exact number. We probably could Google it. But a lot of my friends have put their children on the list when they were born.
Okay.
So from what I've heard, if you go on the list today, it's over 150,000. Now, it could be even more than that. I don't know exactly what it is. But there's no chance. I mean, no chance.
There's there's got to be a joke in there about there being just nothing else to do in Green Bay. I'm not going to make that joke, but somebody might.
I did read that there are more people on the list than there are residents of the city of Green Bay. So there's something there.
That is, wild.
Right.
But, so, fun fact, we ran into each other at a Minnesota United game recently as we're recording this, and we were talking about soccer culture. There is something very European soccer culture about Green Bay Packer football, in that
that fandom is...
The fandom and community and sort of time, place, space is very meaningful in that way.
Yeah, exactly.
God, that's wild.
Yeah.
Before we end, you'd mentioned you'd done the challah baking for the Twin Cities at the vegan festival that happened in September. you did a weekly challah braiding by Torah portion.
Right.
What was the genesis of that? Because like as somebody who's, friends on Facebook, really enjoyed watching your interpretation and the thoughtfulness that went into it each week. What got you started on that path?
Yeah, it started, that was a pandemic project.
Okay.
So I had baked challah before the pandemic, but only, like sporadically.
Mm-hmm.
And it was during the pandemic that I became, one of the, like so many other people.
Sure.
I all of a sudden for the first time was home on Fridays. And so I started to, develop a challah baking practice toward the beginning of the pandemic.
Okay.
And then, I believe it was like a year and a half in 2021 is when I started it with the new Torah reading cycle in the fall of just sort of bringing together. I started to do a handful of these like sort of like artistic challahs and then giving my rabbinic interpretation on it. And just, sort of over time thought like this is something that could be like a fun, creative way to bring out my different passions for baking, for art. Like I think of myself as like an amateur artist and then my, profession and rabbinic perspective on providing commentary on the weekly portion. So it was a really fun project. I did it 2 full years. I want to do it. I'm thinking about like what is the next iteration.
Yeah.
I thought about maybe doing Haftarah, which I don't know. We'll
see. Whoa.
But I'm ready to take it in a new direction, and I still love doing it. But I'm ready for like, okay, what's next with this project?
Oh, that's awesome.
So.
We'll keep an eye on where that goes. And with that, last couple of questions, we'll get you out of here. First, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Well, it's actually Sukkot.
Is it really?
So that was
awesome.
not like a pre.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, Sukkot's my favorite holiday, and I love fall, as I already shared, and hosting. I like to host.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And what's your favorite Jewish food?
Wow, this is a hard one.
We always end on the real tough ones.
I will. It's hard for me not to say challah. Like, how can I not say that? But I think I'm gonna say I'll leave that aside. I think just matzo ball soup, classic.
Any ones in particular?
I like a more fluffy version of matzo ball soup. I love Katz's.
Okay, sure. In New York. Excellent choice.
Yeah.
Rabbi Jill Avrin, thank you so much for talking with us about YourJewish, and we look forward to hearing what you have in store for us at Sukkot Giving at Bethel on November 3rd. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me on.
The Who the Folk podcast is a part of the Jewfolk Podcast Network and a product of Jewfolk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.